The scorching heat of the summer sun bore down mercilessly as Hannah Taylor's fingers clawed at the parched earth. Her palms raw and bleeding as she dragged herself away from the only home she'd ever known now, a roaring inferno against the Colorado sky. The smell of smoke filled her lungs, and the distant screams of livestock echoed in her ears as she crawled, inch by agonizing inch, away from the burning homestead that had once been her family's pride. It was 1874 in the unforgiving landscape near Fort Garland, Colorado, and Hannah was certain she would die. At 22, she had survived many hardships of frontier life, but nothing like this. The raiders had come at dawn, faceless men with hatred in their hearts and greed in their eyes. They had taken everything her father's life, their cattle, and finally, with a single torch thrown onto the hay-strewn barn floor, their home. Hannah's vision blurred as she continued crawling westward. The rough terrain tore at her already tattered dress, her long brown hair matted with dirt and blood. The wound on her leg where a bullet had grazed her thigh pulsed with each movement, but she refused to surrender. The mountains loomed in the distance, both a beacon of hope and a reminder of how far she had yet to go to reach help. "Keep going," she whispered to herself, her voice a hoarse rasp. "Pa would want you to live." The sun climbed higher and Hannah's strength waned. Her arms trembled as they struggled to pull her forward. She hadn't thought to grab water, food, or anything useful as she fled. The distant rumble of hooves made her freeze. Were the raiders returning to finish what they started? Hannah tried to pull herself behind a cluster of sagebrush, but her injured leg refused to cooperate. The hoofbeats grew louder and a shadow fell over her. A man atop a dappled gray stallion looked down at her with piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of a weathered hat. "Miss." "Good Lord, what's happened to you?" the man asked, his voice deep and concerned as he quickly dismounted. Hannah tried to speak, but her parched throat produced only a raspy whisper. "Raiders! Fire!" She gestured weakly back toward the plume of black smoke still visible in the distance. The stranger knelt beside her, his movements careful as he assessed her condition. "My name's Quentin Zachariah. I've got a camp not far from here. Let me help you." Hannah flinched as his hands moved toward her. She had heard stories of women alone on the frontier, of dangers that sometimes wore a helpful smile. "I won't hurt you, miss. You have my word," Quentin said softly, seeming to understand her fear. "But you need water and that leg needs tending." Hannah studied him through half-closed eyes. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, but his eyes held no malice. His clothes were dusty but well-kept denims, a faded blue shirt and a leather vest, not the garb of the outlaws who had attacked her home. "Hannah," she managed to whisper. "Hannah Taylor." Quentin nodded and carefully lifted her. The pain in her leg flared and the world spun as he placed her gently on his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist to keep her from falling. "Hold on, Miss Taylor. We'll have you fixed up soon." As the horse began to move, Hannah felt consciousness slipping away. The last thing she remembered was the solid warmth of the stranger at her back and the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves on the hard, packed earth. When Hannah awoke, she was lying on a bedroll beneath a canvas tent. A lantern glowed softly nearby, and she could hear the crackling of a fire outside. For a moment, panic seized her as memories flooded back the attack, the flames, her father's lifeless body on the porch steps. "You're safe now," came Quentin's voice as he ducked into the tent. He carried a tin cup of steaming liquid. "It's just willow bark tea. It'll help with the pain and fever." Hannah tried to sit up, but her body protested with sharp stabs of pain. "Easy there," Quentin cautioned, setting down the cup and helping her into a sitting position. "You've been through hell, Miss Taylor." "My father," Hannah began, her voice breaking. "He's gone. They killed him before I could even scream." Quentin's expression darkened. "I'm sorry for your loss. No one should have to endure such tragedy." He handed her the tea. "Drink this. Then we'll tend to that leg properly." Hannah sipped the bitter tea, studying her rescuer. In the lantern light, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His hands were calloused from hard work, but they moved with a gentle precision as he prepared bandages from torn cloth. "Are you a doctor, Mr. Zachariah?" Hannah asked. A small smile crossed his face. "No, madam. Just a cowboy who's seen enough injuries to know a thing or two about patching them up. Worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana and learned from the trail doctors." Hannah nodded, wincing as she shifted position. "What brings you to Fort Garland?" "Looking for a fresh start," he replied, his eyes momentarily distant. "I've been scouting land, thinking of putting down roots after years on the trail." He helped her drink more tea, then gestured to her injured leg. "I need to clean and bandage that wound. It's not deep, but out here, infection can be deadly." Hannah hesitated, then nodded, knowing he was right. With as much dignity as she could muster, she arranged her tattered dress to expose only the wounded area of her thigh. Quentin worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with whiskey from his saddlebag, the sting making her gasp, before applying a paste of crushed herbs. "Old Apache remedy," he explained. "Learned it from a medicine man who saved my life after a rattlesnake bite." As he wrapped clean bandages around her leg, Hannah felt tears welling in her eyes, not from physical pain, but from the crushing weight of her new reality. "I have nothing left," she whispered. "Everything is gone." Quentin tied off the bandage and met her gaze steadily. "Not everything, Miss Taylor. You've got your life, and from what I can tell, you've got plenty of grit. That's more than many can claim out here." His words, simple and direct, offered an unexpected comfort. Hannah wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Zachariah, for everything. Call me Quentin, and you should rest now. We'll figure out what comes next in the morning." As Quentin left the tent, Hannah sank back onto the bedroll. Despite the horrors of the day, despite the loss and pain, she felt a small flicker of something unexpected hope. In this harsh wilderness, a stranger had shown her kindness. It wasn't much, but for tonight it was enough. For 3 days, Hannah recovered in Quentin's camp. Her fever broke on the second night, and by the third day she could stand with Quentin's help. He had fashioned a walking stick from a straight aspen branch, which she used to hobble around the camp. On the morning of the 4th day, Quentin returned from hunting with a small deer slung over his horse's back. He found Hannah sitting by the fire, her face turned toward the east, toward what had been her home. "I need to go back," she said without preamble as he dismounted. "I need to bury my father." Quentin set down his rifle, his expression grave. "I was heading that way myself, to see what might be salvaged. Are you sure you're strong enough?" Hannah nodded firmly. "I have to do this." After a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush, they set out. Quentin insisted Hannah ride his horse while he walked alongside, leading the animal by its reins. The journey was slow, the morning sun climbing higher as they approached what remained of the Taylor homestead. The sight that greeted them was worse than Hannah had imagined. The house and barn were reduced to charred timbers and ash. The fields that had been ripe with corn and wheat were trampled and ruined. And there, on the front porch steps where she'd last seen him, lay her father's body, mercifully untouched by animals. Hannah slid from the horse before Quentin could help her, stumbling toward her father. The grief she'd held at bay came crashing down, and she fell to her knees beside him, sobs racking her body. Quentin stood back, allowing her this private moment of mourning. When her cries quieted to soft, hiccuping breaths, he approached, a shovel from his pack in hand. "I'll dig the grave," he offered. "Under that cottonwood tree where the view stretches all the way to the mountains. Seems a proper place." Hannah looked up, her face streaked with tears and soot. He loved that view, said it reminded him that God made beauty even in the harshest places. While Quentin dug, Hannah gathered wildflowers from the untrampled edges of the property. She found her father's Bible, miraculously unburnt, lying where it must have fallen from his pocket. By midday, they laid Jonathan Taylor to rest beneath the cottonwood, Hannah reading from the weathered Bible while Quentin stood with his hat held respectfully to his chest. As they filled the grave, Hannah spoke of her father, a man who had brought her west after her mother died of consumption, who had built this homestead with his bare hands, who had taught her to shoot, ride, and read the stars. "He was a good man," Quentin said when she finished. "This land needs more like him." They stood in silence for a moment before Quentin spoke again. "Let me look through what's left. There might be something worth salvaging." Together, they picked through the ruins. Most everything was destroyed, but in what had been her father's workshop, they found a metal lockbox, its contents protected from the flames. Inside were deeds to the land, a small pouch of gold coins and a faded daguerreotype of Hannah's mother. "This is something," Quentin said, handing her the box. "The land is still yours. You could rebuild." Hannah looked around at the devastation, at the blackened remains of years of hard work. "How? I have no one to help me, no means to start again." Quentin was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. Then he looked at Hannah, determination in his gaze. "What if you did have help, Mr. Zachariah?" "Quentin," he corrected. "And I'm serious. I told you I was looking for land. This is good land. Your father chose well." Hannah stared at him, trying to understand what he was proposing. "I'm not asking for charity," she said firmly. "Good, because I'm not offering any," Quentin replied, a hint of a smile on his lips. "I'm proposing a partnership. I have the skills and some savings. You have the land and, I'd wager, plenty of knowledge about farming it." Hannah considered his words. She had nowhere else to go. The nearest town was a day's ride, and she knew no one there well enough to ask for shelter. The few neighboring homesteads were too far to reach easily in her condition. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, suspicious despite her desperate circumstances. Quentin's expression grew serious. "Because 8 years ago I was left with nothing when outlaws raided my family's ranch in Texas. A stranger helped me then. I'm just passing on the kindness." His honesty disarmed her. Hannah looked out over the land, her land, and made her decision. "All right, Mr. Zachariah, we have a deal, but I want everything in writing, and I expect to work as an equal partner." Quentin's face broke into a genuine smile. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Miss Taylor." That evening they made camp on the edge of the property, away from the ruins and the fresh grave. As they sat by the fire, Quentin sketched plans in the dirt with a stick: a new cabin, a barn, fences for livestock. "We'll start with a shelter," he explained. "Something simple but sturdy. Once that's done, we can begin on the larger structures." Hannah listened, adding her own suggestions based on what had worked well before. For the first time since the attack, she felt a sense of purpose returning. This land had been her father's dream, and now it would be her future, albeit with an unexpected partner. As the fire died down to embers, Hannah looked across at Quentin, his face illuminated in the soft glow. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding." The following weeks were filled with backbreaking labor. True to his word, Quentin began work on a small cabin immediately. He rode into Fort Garland for supplies, returning with lumber, tools, seeds for replanting, and basic necessities. Hannah's leg healed slowly but steadily, and each day she took on more work. She cleared debris from the burned structures, salvaging nails and any metal fittings that could be reused. She tended a small vegetable garden Quentin helped her plant, using seeds he'd purchased in town. Their days fell into a rhythm, rising at dawn, working until dusk, sharing simple meals by the campfire. At night, Hannah still slept in Quentin's tent while he made do with a bedroll beneath the stars. Despite their partnership, they maintained a respectful distance, both aware of the impropriety of their arrangement. One evening, as Hannah stirred a pot of rabbit stew, she broached the subject. "People will talk, you know. A man and woman living alone on a homestead, unmarried." Quentin, who was whittling a piece of wood by the fire, looked up. "Does that concern you?" "It should concern both of us," Hannah replied pragmatically. "Reputation matters out here, especially for a woman alone." Quentin set aside his knife and the half-formed wooden spoon he'd been creating. "You're right, of course. I hadn't thought it through. Once the cabin's finished, I could build a separate shelter for myself. Or," he hesitated. "Or," Hannah prompted, "we could make this arrangement more formal. A marriage of convenience isn't uncommon on the frontier." His voice was matter-of-fact, but he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Hannah nearly dropped the wooden spoon she was using to stir the stew. A marriage of convenience. The idea wasn't shocking. She knew many couples who had wed for practical reasons rather than love. But she hadn't expected this proposal, if it could be called that, from Quentin. "That's quite a suggestion, Mr. Zachariah," she said carefully. "It's just an option," he replied quickly. "I'm not trying to pressure you, Miss Taylor. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more." "For propriety's sake." Hannah studied him across the fire. In the weeks they'd worked side by side, she'd come to respect Quentin's work ethic, his quiet competence, his unfailing kindness. He was handsome, too, in a rugged way, though she tried not to dwell on that fact. "Let me think on it," she finally said, returning her attention to the stew. Quentin nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Of course. Take all the time you need." The conversation hung between them as they ate their dinner in silence. Later, as Hannah prepared for sleep in the tent, she found herself considering Quentin's suggestion more seriously than she'd expected to. A marriage of convenience. It made practical sense. Two people working toward a common goal, building a life on this land. It didn't need to be more complicated than that. And yet, as she drifted off to sleep, Hannah couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be Quentin Zachariah's wife in more than name only. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a welcome respite from the summer heat. Hannah emerged from the tent to find Quentin already at work, hewing logs for the cabin's walls. She watched him for a moment, admiring the easy strength in his movements before announcing her presence. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," she said without preamble. Quentin set down his axe, wiping sweat from his brow. "And it makes sense," Hannah admitted, "but I'd want certain conditions. Name them." Hannah had rehearsed this in her mind all night. "First, we'd be equal partners in everything: the land, the crops, the decisions. Second, this would be a marriage on paper only, unless we both decide otherwise someday. And third, if either of us wants to end the arrangement after a year, we can dissolve it with no ill will." Quentin considered her words, then nodded slowly. "Those are fair terms. I accept them all." "Then yes, Mr. Zachariah, I will marry you for convenience's sake." A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Well, I suppose I should start calling you Hannah then." The simple use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "And I'll call you Quentin," she replied, returning his smile. They were married 3 days later in Fort Garland by a traveling circuit judge. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, witnessed only by the local storekeeper and his wife. Hannah wore her cleanest dress, a faded blue calico that had survived the fire because it had been hanging on the clothesline, and Quentin donned a clean shirt and his least weathered hat. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the judge declared, closing his Bible with a snap. "You may kiss the bride." Hannah and Quentin exchanged an awkward glance. They hadn't discussed this part. After a moment's hesitation, Quentin leaned forward and placed a chaste kiss on her cheek. The touch of his lips, brief as it was, sent a flutter through Hannah's chest that she promptly ignored. They spent their wedding night as they had every other Hannah in the tent, Quentin beneath the stars. The only difference was the gold band on Hannah's finger, fashioned by Quentin from a small nugget he'd panned years ago in a Colorado stream. The cabin was completed by the end of August, a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace and 2 windows. It was small but solid, built to withstand the harsh Colorado winters. As Hannah helped Quentin place the last of the shingles on the roof, a sense of accomplishment washed over her. "It's not much," Quentin said, stepping back to survey their work, "but it's a start." Hannah ran her hand along the rough-hewn timber of the doorframe. "It's more than I had a month ago. It's a home." That evening, they moved their meager belongings into the cabin. The interior was sparse: a table and 2 chairs Quentin had crafted, a bed frame with a straw mattress, a small bookshelf for Hannah's Bible, and the few books they'd purchased in town. Standing in the center of the single room, Hannah suddenly realized the awkwardness of their situation. 1 cabin. 1 bed. A marriage that was supposed to remain unconsummated. Quentin seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll sleep by the fire," he said, unrolling his bedroll on the floor near the hearth. Hannah wanted to protest. It was his home too, after all, but relief won out. Despite their marriage of convenience, despite the growing comfort she felt in Quentin's presence, she wasn't ready for more. "Thank you," she said softly. That night, lying in the bed alone, Hannah listened to Quentin's steady breathing across the room. Outside, coyotes called to one another in the distance. The cabin creaked and settled around them. It wasn't the home she'd lost, but it was shelter, safety, a new beginning. And for that, she was grateful. As autumn painted the Colorado landscape in gold and crimson, Hannah and Quentin fell into a comfortable routine. They rose with the sun, worked the land together, prepared meals side by side, and spent evenings planning for the future. The cabin, though small, became a true home, adorned with dried wildflowers Hannah gathered, warmed by the quilts they purchased from a traveling peddler, filled with the aroma of fresh baked bread from the small clay oven Quentin built beside the fireplace. Their partnership flourished. Quentin proved to be not just a skilled builder but a knowledgeable rancher. He purchased a small herd of cattle with his savings and taught Hannah the finer points of animal husbandry. Hannah, in turn, shared her expertise in farming, teaching Quentin which crops thrived in the Colorado soil and how to predict weather patterns by watching the wildlife. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs, complementing each other's strengths. What had begun as a practical arrangement was evolving into something deeper: a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. One crisp October evening, as they sat before the fire after a long day of harvesting the last of the season's vegetables, Quentin cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he began, setting aside the harness he'd been repairing. "This cabin, it won't be enough for long." Hannah looked up from her mending. "What do you mean? Winter's coming. We'll be spending more time indoors and looking ahead. If we're going to make this ranch successful, we might need help someday. Hired hands, maybe." Hannah nodded slowly, understanding his reasoning. "You want to expand the cabin?" "No," Quentin said, meeting her gaze steadily. "I want to build you the home you deserve. Not just a shelter, but a proper house. Something like what you lost, only better." The simple sincerity in his voice touched Hannah deeply. "Quentin, you've already done so much. I made you a promise," he interrupted gently. "When we agreed to this partnership, I said we'd rebuild, and we have. But a single-room cabin isn't what I had in mind. You deserve more." Hannah set her sewing aside and moved to sit beside him on the bench. "We deserve more," she corrected. "This is your home, too." Quentin smiled, the firelight catching the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "Then we'll build it together. A proper homestead." In that moment, something shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained since their wedding seemed to narrow. The air in the cabin suddenly charged with an awareness neither had acknowledged before. Hannah was acutely conscious of Quentin's proximity, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his gaze lingered on her face. For a breathless moment, she thought he might lean closer, might bridge the final gap between them. Instead, he stood abruptly. "I should check on the livestock before turning in," he said, his voice slightly rough. "It's getting colder at night." As he donned his coat and stepped outside, Hannah remained by the fire, her heart beating unusually fast. Something was changing between them, something neither had planned for when they'd agreed to their marriage of convenience. That night, as Quentin slept on his bedroll by the hearth, Hannah lay awake, contemplating the man who had become her husband. She had married him for practical reasons, but she could no longer deny that her feelings had grown more complicated. There was an attraction there, a fondness that went beyond gratitude or friendship. The question was, did Quentin feel the same? And even if he did, what would it mean for their carefully negotiated arrangement? The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing the land in white before they could begin work on the new house. The framing lumber Quentin had cut and prepared was stored beneath oiled canvas, waiting for spring. Instead, they focused on fortifying the cabin for winter, adding extra chinking between the logs, building a lean-to for additional firewood storage, and smoking meat to see them through the coldest months. Winter on the Colorado frontier was harsh and unforgiving. Blizzards howled down from the mountains, trapping them indoors for days at a time. The temperature plummeted, ice forming on the inside of the windows despite the constant fire in the hearth. But within their small cabin, Hannah and Quentin created a haven of warmth and companionship. During those long winter evenings, they talked as never before. Quentin told Hannah of his childhood in Texas, of losing his parents and younger sister to a raid similar to the one that had claimed her father. He spoke of the years he'd spent drifting, working cattle drives, learning skills, saving money, and searching for a place to belong again. Hannah shared stories of her life before Colorado, of growing up in Illinois, of her mother's gentle guidance, of the difficult journey west after her death. She described her father's determination to build a new life, his patience in teaching her everything he knew, his unwavering faith that had sustained them through difficult times. As they shared their histories, their dreams, their fears, the emotional distance between them diminished. They no longer sat on opposite sides of the fire but side by side, sometimes reading from the same book, sometimes simply enjoying the comfort of each other's presence. On Christmas Eve, a particularly violent storm raged outside the cabin. The wind screamed around the eaves, snow piled against the door, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the bucket by the hearth. Hannah added another log to the fire while Quentin returned from checking the livestock in the small barn they'd constructed before the first snow. "The animals are fine," he reported, stamping snow from his boots and hanging his frost-covered coat by the door. "But it's bitter out there. This might be the worst storm yet." Hannah handed him a cup of hot coffee. "Come warm yourself." I've made a special supper for tonight, venison stew with the last of the dried vegetables, and I saved some sugar for a treat." Quentin raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What's the occasion?" "It's Christmas Eve," Hannah reminded him with a smile. "I know we agreed not to exchange gifts, given our limited resources, but I wanted to mark the day somehow." As they sat down to their simple but festive meal, Hannah noticed Quentin seemed uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with his spoon and glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked. Quentin set down his spoon and reached into his pocket. "I know we said no gifts, but I couldn't help myself." He placed a small object wrapped in a scrap of cloth on the table between them. "Merry Christmas, Hannah." Hannah unwrapped the cloth to find a delicately carved wooden rose, its petals so thin they were almost translucent, its stem curling gracefully. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. "Quentin," she breathed, lifting the fragile creation. "It's beautiful. When did you make this?" "During those stormy days when you thought I was napping by the fire," he admitted with a sheepish smile. "I wanted you to have something beautiful, even in the midst of winter." Touched beyond words, Hannah cradled the wooden flower in her palm. "Thank you. It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." She hesitated, then added, "I have something for you too, although it's not as tangible." Quentin waited expectantly as Hannah gathered her courage. "When we married, we agreed it would be a partnership of convenience, nothing more," she began, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. "But these past months, working alongside you, sharing this home with you, my feelings have changed." Quentin's expression grew serious, his eyes never leaving her face. "How have they changed, Hannah?" "I've come to care for you, Quentin, not just as a partner or friend, but—" She faltered, suddenly afraid she had misread his actions, his kindness. "But as a husband," he finished softly. Hannah nodded, unable to find more words. Quentin reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I've felt the same way for months now, but I didn't want to pressure you. You've lost so much, endured so much. I wanted to give you time." "And now?" Hannah asked, hardly daring to hope. "Now, if you're willing, I'd like us to be truly married in every sense." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I love you, Hannah Zachariah, not for convenience but with my whole heart." The declaration, simple and sincere, filled Hannah with joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for some time now." Later that night, as the storm raged outside and the fire burned low in the hearth, Hannah and Quentin consummated their marriage. What had begun as a practical arrangement transformed into a union of love, passion, and deep commitment. In the small cabin they had built together, they found in each other the home they had both been seeking. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land, Hannah and Quentin began work on their new house. The cabin that had sheltered them through the winter would become a storage building, replaced by a 2-story home with multiple bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a covered porch wrapping around 2 sides. They worked side by side as they had since the beginning, but now with a deeper connection, stolen kisses as they passed each other lumber, lingering touches as they worked together to raise wall frames, shared laughter as they planned rooms for children they hoped to have someday. By midsummer, the new house was taking shape. The framework stood proud against the Colorado sky, a testament to their shared vision and hard work. The cattle herd had grown with the birth of spring calves. The fields were lush with wheat and corn, and the vegetable garden flourished under Hannah's careful tending. One evening, as they sat on a stack of lumber, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold, Hannah turned to Quentin with tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong," she assured him, wiping away a tear. "I was just thinking about my father, about the day I crawled away from our burning homestead, certain I would die alone in the wilderness, if you hadn't found me that day." Quentin pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I did find you. And you found me a drifter who'd given up on having a home or family again." Hannah leaned into his embrace. "Do you think they're watching over us? My father and your family, I'm sure of it," Quentin replied with conviction. "Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished, Hannah. Of your strength and determination. Of the home we're building on the land he loved." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on their makeshift bench, arms around each other, hearts full of gratitude for the love they'd found amidst the ashes of tragedy. The homestead that had once been reduced to cinders now pulsed with new life and promise. By the end of September 1875, just over a year after Hannah had crawled away from her burning home, the new house was completed. It stood tall and proud on a rise overlooking the valley, 2 stories of solid construction with a wide front porch, multiple windows to catch the light, and a stone chimney that would keep them warm through the coming winter. The day they moved in, Hannah walked through each room, marveling at what they had accomplished together. The main floor held a spacious kitchen with a proper cast iron stove purchased on a trip to Denver, a cozy sitting room with bookshelves Quentin had crafted, and a dining room large enough to host neighbors for holiday meals. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, 1 for them, and 2 for the children they hoped would join their family someday. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," Hannah said as Quentin joined her in what would be their bedroom. He had built a sturdy bed frame and Hannah had sewn quilts and curtains, transforming the space into a peaceful retreat. "You deserve nothing less," Quentin replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But the house is just the beginning. I want to fill it with laughter, with family, with memories." Hannah turned in his embrace, a smile playing at her lips. "About that," she began, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "I believe we've already started." Quentin's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with joy as understanding dawned. "Are you certain?" Hannah nodded, her own happiness reflected in his face. "Dr. Bennett confirmed it when we were in Fort Garland last week. We're going to have a baby in the spring." Quentin lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around before setting her carefully back down. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice as he placed his hand once more on her still flat belly. Our child, Hannah echoed, covering his hand with hers. "The first of many, I hope. This house has room for a large family." That night, as they lay in their new bed, plans and dreams flowing between them, Hannah marveled at how life could change in the space of a year. From the darkest day of her life crawling away from destruction and death, to this moment of perfect contentment beside the man she loved, carrying their child beneath her heart. "Thank you," she whispered to Quentin in the darkness. "For what?" he asked, his voice drowsy with approaching sleep. "For finding me that day, for building me not just a new home but a new life." Quentin pulled her closer. "You rebuilt me too, Hannah. I was just pieces before you, now I'm whole." In the years that followed, the Zachariah homestead flourished, becoming one of the most prosperous ranches in the Fort Garland area. Their son, Jonathan Quentin Zachariah, was born in April 1876, a healthy, strong boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. He was followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1878, and twin boys, Samuel and David, in 1881. The land that had once been scorched by fire now teemed with life-lush pastures where cattle grazed, fields heavy with grain, orchards that provided fruit for Hannah's preserves. gardens that yielded vegetables for their table and extras to sell in town. The new barn housed not just livestock but fine horses bred from stock Quentin carefully selected. The original cabin, their first home together, became a workshop where Quentin taught his children woodworking and other practical skills. As their family and prosperity grew, Hannah and Quentin never forgot the tragedy that had brought them together. Each year on the anniversary of the raid, they visited Jonathan Taylor's grave beneath the cottonwood tree, bringing wildflowers and teaching their children about the grandfather they had never known but whose legacy they carried forward. They also made a practice of helping others who had suffered similar misfortunes. When drought or fire or illness struck neighboring homesteads, the Zachariahs were first to offer assistance: food, shelter, labor, whatever was needed to help their neighbors rebuild. They took in orphan children, taught valuable skills to young men and women seeking work, and opened their home to travelers in need of rest. In 1884, 10 years after Hannah had crawled away from her burning homestead, the community of Fort Garland honored the Zachariahs for their contributions to the area. The town hall was filled with people whose lives they had touched, whose hardships they had eased, whose friendship they had earned through generosity and kindness. As Hannah stood beside Quentin, surrounded by their children and friends, listening to the heartfelt words of gratitude from those they had helped, she felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun in fire and desperation had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. That night, after the children were asleep, Hannah and Quentin sat on the porch swing Quentin had built when she was pregnant with their first child. The stars spread across the Colorado sky like diamonds on velvet, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine from the nearby mountains. "I was thinking about the day we met," Quentin said, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "How close I came to taking a different trail that morning." Hannah shuddered at the thought. "If you hadn't found me." "But I did," he reminded her, echoing words spoken years before. "Some might call it luck or coincidence. I call it providence." Hannah nodded, leaning into his embrace. "My father used to say that God brings beauty from ashes. I didn't understand what he meant until I lived it myself." Quentin kissed her softly. "From the ashes of your homestead to all this," he gestured toward their thriving ranch, their beautiful home, the rooms upstairs where their children slept peacefully. "It's more than I ever dreamed of having." "It's more than either of us dreamed," Hannah agreed. "But the greatest gift isn't the land or the house or even our success." "What is it then?" Quentin asked, though the look in his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "Love," Hannah said simply. "The love we found when we least expected it. The love that rebuilt not just a homestead, but 2 broken hearts." As the moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light across the land they had reclaimed from tragedy, Hannah and Quentin Zachariah remained on their porch, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 people who had found in each other not just partnership or comfort, but a profound and enduring love that had transformed loss into legacy, despair into hope, and ashes into beauty. In the spring of 1890, as the Zachariah homestead celebrated its 16th year, the family gathered for a special occasion. Their eldest son, Jonathan, now 14, had completed his first major building project, a gazebo overlooking the pond Quentin had created by damming a small stream that crossed their property. The white wooden structure, with its intricate lattice work and comfortable benches, was a testament to the skills Jonathan had learned from his father. "It's beautiful, John," Hannah said, running her hand along the smooth railing. "Your grandfather would have been proud of your craftsmanship." Jonathan beamed at the praise, his blue eyes so like Quentin's shining with pride. "Pa helped with the roof," he admitted honestly. Only because you haven't learned to shingle yet, Quentin clarified, clapping a hand on his son's shoulder. Next project, you'll do it all yourself. 12-year-old Elizabeth, who had inherited her mother's practical nature along with her brown hair, inspected the gazebo's floor with a critical eye. "It's perfectly level," she declared with satisfaction. "Much better than Billy Morrison's tree house." The 9-year-old twins, Samuel and David, immediately began planning how the gazebo could feature in their elaborate games. "It could be a fort," Samuel suggested. "Or a ship's bridge," David countered. 4-year-old Grace, the youngest Zachariah and the spitting image of her mother, simply twirled in circles, enjoying the way her dress flared out. "Pretty, pretty," she sang. Hannah caught Quentin's eye over their children's heads, sharing a silent moment of joy in the family they had created together. At 38, Hannah's face showed the signs of years spent in the Colorado sun and wind. Fine lines around her eyes and mouth testifying to both laughter and occasional worry. Her figure had softened after 5 pregnancies, but she moved with the same purpose and energy that had always characterized her. Quentin, at 42, remained strong and vital, though silver now threaded through the dark hair at his temples. Years of physical labor had left their mark in the occasional stiffness of his movements on cold mornings, but his hands remained steady, his eyes clear and perceptive. That evening, after a celebratory dinner honoring Jonathan's achievement, Hannah and Quentin walked hand in hand around their property as they often did, checking on livestock, inspecting fences, planning improvements. The ranch had grown substantially over the years, now encompassing not just the original Taylor homestead, but additional acres purchased from neighbors who had moved on or failed to thrive in the challenging Colorado environment. "I've been thinking," Quentin said as they paused to watch the sunset from a hilltop overlooking their land. "Jonathan's getting old enough to take on more responsibility. He has a good head for business and a natural talent with his hands." Hannah nodded. "He's becoming a fine young man." Elizabeth, too, she's showing a real gift for animal husbandry. Those calves she raised from orphans are some of the healthiest in the herd. The twins are still more interested in adventure than work, Quentin chuckled, but they'll come around. "And Gracie is already insisting she wants to learn to ride like her brothers," Hannah added with a smile. "She has your determination." Quentin squeezed Hannah's hand. "What I'm trying to say is, we've built something lasting here, something that will continue beyond us. Our children will inherit not just land and buildings, but values, the knowledge of how to work hard, how to overcome adversity, how to help others." "It's a good legacy," Hannah agreed softly. "Better than I ever imagined having when I was wandering from job to job, too afraid to put down roots again after losing my family." Quentin turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You gave me that, Hannah. You gave me the courage to start over." Hannah shook her head. "We gave it to each other. I was just as lost that day you found me crawling away from the ruins." Quentin kissed her gently. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come along that trail that day?" "No," Hannah replied without hesitation. "Because then I would have to imagine a life without you, without our children, without everything we've built together. And that's no life at all." As they walked back toward their home, where lamplight glowed warm and inviting in the gathering dusk, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From crawling away from destruction with nothing but grief and pain, to standing tall as the matriarch of a thriving family and successful ranch, it was a transformation she could scarcely have imagined in those dark days after the raid. The house Quentin had built for them still stood strong and beautiful, though it had been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. The original cabin remained as well, a humble reminder of their beginnings. Between the two structures lay the physical manifestation of their shared life gardens Hannah had lovingly tended, trees Quentin had planted, pathways their children had worn smooth with play and daily chores. That night, with their children settled in their rooms and the ranch quiet except for the familiar sounds of livestock and the whisper of wind in the cottonwoods, Hannah and Quentin sat together in the bedroom they had shared for 16 years. "I've been saving something," Hannah said, reaching into the drawer of her bedside table. She withdrew a small wooden rose, the Christmas gift Quentin had carved for her during that first winter in the cabin. Though faded with age, it remained intact, its delicate petals a testament to Quentin's skill and care. "You kept it all these years?" Quentin asked, gently taking the carving from her hand. "Of course I did," Hannah replied. "It reminds me of the moment I realized I didn't just respect or appreciate you, I loved you. That Christmas Eve when you gave me this rose, when we finally acknowledged what was growing between us. That was the night I truly felt like I had a home again." Quentin set the wooden rose carefully on the table and drew Hannah into his arms. "Home isn't just the house I built you," he murmured against her hair. "It's this you and me, our family, the life we've made together." "I know," Hannah whispered. "That's why I've never been afraid, not since that day you found me. Because even when everything else was lost, we found each other. And that's a treasure fire can't burn and thieves can't steal." As they held each other in the quiet darkness, secure in the home they had built from ashes and determination, Hannah and Quentin Zachariah embodied the resilience and hope of the American frontier, the ability to begin again, to forge something enduring from tragedy, to transform a desperate crawl away from destruction into a triumphant journey toward love, family, and lasting legacy. In the autumn of 1900, as a new century dawned, the Zachariah homestead celebrated its 25th anniversary. What had begun as a small, desperate effort to rebuild after tragedy had become one of the most respected ranches in Colorado. The original cabin and the house Quentin had built for Hannah still stood at the heart of what was now a sprawling operation encompassing cattle ranching, horse breeding, and crop production. Hannah, now 50, and Quentin, 54, had weathered the challenges that came with a quarter-century of frontier life: droughts and blizzards, economic downturns, occasional conflicts with neighboring ranchers, the inevitable illnesses and accidents that were part of rural existence. But they had faced each challenge together, their partnership strengthened by years of shared struggle and triumph. Their children had grown into capable adults who embodied the values their parents had instilled. Jonathan, 24, had married Mary Bennett, the doctor's daughter, and was now managing much of the ranch's daily operations. Elizabeth, 22, had surprised everyone by attending a women's college in Denver before returning to the ranch with new ideas for breeding programs and sustainable farming practices. The twins, Samuel and David, 19, complemented each other perfectly. Samuel with his head for figures handling the business aspects, while David's natural charm made him the face of the Zachariah brand at livestock auctions and trade negotiations. Even little Grace, no longer so little at 14, had proven herself a talented horsewoman and was already showing signs of inheriting her mother's quiet strength and her father's determined spirit. To mark the 25th anniversary of the homestead's rebirth, the Zachariahs hosted a gathering that brought together neighbors, friends, and family from miles around. Long tables set up in the yard groaned with food prepared by Hannah and Elizabeth, assisted by Mary and several neighboring women. Children played games organized by Grace and her friends, while men gathered to admire the quality of the Zachariah livestock and crops. As twilight approached, Quentin called for everyone's attention, standing on the porch steps with Hannah at his side. 26 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the yard where lanterns now glowed against the gathering dusk. I was a drifter with no home and no future. I happened to ride past this land on a summer morning and found a young woman crawling away from her burning homestead. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as many heard this story for the first time. That woman, Quentin continued, his hand finding Hannah's, had just lost everything: her father, her home, nearly her life. But she had something that couldn't be destroyed by fire or stolen by raiders. She had courage, determination, a spirit that refused to surrender. Hannah squeezed his hand, emotion welling in her throat as she recalled those desperate hours. I offered to help her rebuild, Quentin went on. It seemed like the right thing to do. What I didn't realize was that in helping her reconstruct a homestead, I would find much more than a partner in hard work. I would find the love of my life, the mother of my children, the heart of this ranch that has become our legacy. Tears shimmered in Hannah's eyes as Quentin turned to face her directly. Hannah Taylor Zachariah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. 25 years ago, I built you a house to replace the one you lost, but you built me a home I never dreamed of having. Everything we see around us today, he gestured to the prosperous ranch, the gathered family and friends, the land that had flourished under their care, began with your refusal to give up that day. Your strength became my strength. Your hope became my hope. Your love became my salvation. Hannah, overwhelmed by his words, could only embrace him as their children and friends applauded. When she found her voice again, she addressed the gathering. My father used to say that the measure of a person isn't found in what they build or own, but in what they give, she said, her clear voice carrying across the yard. By that measure, I am surrounded by wealth beyond imagining in the family we've raised, the friendships we've fostered, the land we've nurtured. What began in fire and desperation has become a testament to renewal and resilience. For that blessing, I thank God every day. As darkness fell, the celebration continued with music and dancing. Jonathan played the fiddle his grandfather had taught him to use, while Samuel accompanied him on the guitar. Couples of all ages took turns on the makeshift dance floor, from Grace and her school friends to elderly neighbors who had known the Zachariahs since those early difficult days. Hannah and Quentin danced too, moving with the easy familiarity of two people whose bodies and hearts had been in rhythm for a quarter century. As they swayed to a waltz beneath stars that seemed to hang just above the cottonwood trees, Hannah rested her head against Quentin's shoulder. Did you ever imagine, that day you found me, that we would be here 25 years later? She asked softly. Quentin's arm tightened around her waist. I couldn't have dreamed it, he admitted. I was just trying to do the right thing to help someone in need. That's who you are, Hannah said, lifting her face to look at him. The years had etched lines around his eyes and silvered his once dark hair, but to Hannah, he was as handsome as the day he'd found her. A good man who does the right thing even when it's difficult. That's why I fell in love with you. And here I thought it was my skill with an axe, Quentin teased, his eyes twinkling in the lantern light. Hannah laughed, the sound as clear and joyful as it had been in her youth. That didn't hurt your cause, I must admit. As the music shifted to another tune, they continued dancing, surrounded by the family and community they had built together. The homestead that had risen from ashes now stood as a beacon of possibility, proof that even from the most desperate circumstances, with courage, determination, and love, something beautiful and lasting could emerge. Later that night, after the guests had departed and their children had retired to their rooms or homes, Hannah and Quentin walked together to the cottonwood tree where her father was buried. The moon cast long shadows across the gravesite, now marked by a proper headstone and surrounded by a small garden of perennial flowers that bloomed from spring through fall. "He would be proud," Quentin said, as Hannah placed a small bouquet of late-blooming asters on the grave. "Of you, of what you've accomplished, of the family you've raised." "Of what we've accomplished," Hannah corrected gently. "He would have liked you, Quentin. You're cut from the same cloth, honorable, hardworking, devoted to family." They stood in silence for a moment, paying respects to the man whose dream had brought Hannah to this land, whose tragic death had set in motion the chain of events that led to their meeting. "Life is strange," Hannah mused as they walked back toward their home. "If not for that terrible day, we might never have met. Our children wouldn't exist. This ranch wouldn't be what it is now." "It's a mystery," Quentin agreed. "How something so devastating could lead to so much good. Not that I'd ever wish such suffering on anyone." "No," Hannah said firmly. "But having endured it, I can look back and see how even in my darkest hour, a path was being prepared. Not just to survival, but to a life fuller and richer than I could have imagined." As they approached their home, the house that had begun as Quentin's promise to Hannah, and had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family and prosperity, they paused to take in the sight. Lamplight still glowed in a few windows where their adult children were reading or talking before bed. The barn and outbuildings stood solid and well-maintained in the moonlight. Fields stretched in all directions, ready for harvest or already yielding to autumn's touch. "From ashes to this," Quentin murmured, echoing words they had spoken to each other many times over the years. "From a desperate crawl to standing tall," Hannah added, leaning into his embrace. Together they entered their home, closing the door on the outside world. The house Quentin had built for Hannah all those years ago had witnessed their joys and sorrows, had sheltered their children and grandchildren, had been the setting for countless moments of ordinary life that, woven together, created an extraordinary legacy. In their bedroom, Hannah opened a small cedar chest she kept beside their bed. Inside, among other treasures, lay the wooden rose Quentin had carved during their first winter together, the tangible symbol of love's first blooming between them. Beside it was a charred corner of her father's Bible, salvaged from the ashes of the original homestead, a reminder of where they had begun. "These remind me," Hannah said, touching the items gently, "that beauty and destruction often exist side by side. That what matters is what we choose to build from the ruins." Quentin sat beside her on the bed, taking her hand in his. "And we chose to build something lasting, something true." "We did," Hannah agreed, closing the chest and turning to face her husband of 26 years. "And we're still building, every day." As they prepared for sleep in the quiet house that had sheltered their love for a quarter century, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate young woman crawling away from her burning homestead to the matriarch of a thriving ranch and family, her life had been transformed through courage, hard work, and most of all, the love of the cowboy who had found her that fateful day and built her not just another home, but a life beyond her wildest dreams. Outside their window, the Colorado night spread star-studded and vast. The same sky that had witnessed their beginning, now keeping watch over the legacy they had created, a legacy of resilience, renewal, and enduring love that had emerged, phoenix-like, from the ashes of tragedy to take flight toward a future bright with promise and possibility.